Dennis, thank you very much for the introduction. I should begin by admitting that my favorite cereal, and I'm not kidding, is Kellogg Raisin Bran Crunch. The agenda for my talk is really strategic implications of the new global reality. And I begin, the whole thing prefaced by really saying that this decade is actually, we could say this time it really is different. Because this decade will see a structural change in the global economy far bigger, far faster than any decade in the last 200 years. And I have reasons to say even in the next 100 years, because it's this decade when essentially it's like a phase change in physics, when water turns into, or ice turns into water, or water turns into steam. And of course, steam can keep getting warmer and hotter, but it's the structural change that takes place. And so this is the decade. And in fact, this structural change in some very important ways is glorious, but at the same time, in some very important ways, it also is scary. So I talk about why it is first glorious. If you look at this country, the US or Europe, in fact, what are the fundamental values that we believe in? It's democracy, it's entrepreneurship, it's capitalism. It's global integration rather than isolation. And essentially what's happening is that 80% of the world's population, that's emerging economies, in fact, vast chunks of that, and increasingly, a greater chunk of that is embracing all of these values. So in fact, how could that not be glorious? Also, over the next 15 to 20 years, the world economy, in real terms, net of inflation, will be more than 2 times its current size. And essentially what's happening is that new US, new Europe are going to get created economically over the next 15 years, and those will happen predominantly in the emerging economies. So therefore, obviously, the US and Europe are not getting poorer in absolute terms. They are getting richer. They have significant challenges, in particular, the increasing wealth divide in the rich countries. And you see the Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street and various other movements. So there are serious challenges. But if you look at the country as a whole, US is not getting poorer, or Europe is not getting poorer, and so on. But what's happening is that another America and another Europe are going to get created. And so therefore, what could be wrong about that? Because obviously that means, huge market opportunities for us. So therefore, those are all the glorious things about how the world will change, not in the next 50 years, but in the next 10 to 15 years. But now let's look at the scary part. And the scary part, one, of course, is the relative part. Because clearly, US has been for the last 100 years, at least the last 60, 70 years, been the predominant superpower. And what that has also meant is that American companies have been the predominant giants in their respective industries around the world. It's pretty much a given that next 15 years, US is no longer the largest economy. And so therefore, this relative shift in power, what we could say power shift, is scary, So that's one part of what's scary. And of course, the rest of the world offers an opportunity, but the rest of the world also offers challenges, because emerging economies, yes, they are big, they're growing rapidly, but they are qualitatively, structurally, very different kind of markets. And so therefore, it's not a replication game that we can take Kellogg's strategy and replicate in other markets and hope to succeed. And so because where they are structurally, qualitatively different, there is no guarantee that because we succeed in the US or UK, that we necessarily succeed in the new emerging market. So that's, kind of, that part is scary, but it's also scary in some other ways, because, we have massive wealth divide in the developed countries, and people like Mayor Bloomberg, and he is in fact not today, but he talked about it 6 months back, that he wouldn't be surprised if there could be riots in American cities. And so therefore, obviously we are looking at what's happening in Europe, in certain countries in Europe. And so that's the scary part, because structural changes are not easy to adjust to for companies, and obviously for societies, for countries. And plus, the last part in terms of the new global reality and going beyond the economic front, I think this is a dangerous decade. In particular, I think I look at Asia as particularly a dangerous zone, not just in economic terms. I think economically it's a huge opportunity, but it's the risk of war in Asia is actually, I think, increasing. And as I talk to people who follow those things, they are getting increasingly concerned. So that's how it is. But I think we can be certain that the world in 2020 will look far more different than the world in 2010 than 2010 does or did compared to 2000.